72%. That's one company's share of the entire world's contract chip manufacturing in the first 3 months of this year. And that company isn't American and it's not Chinese. You have probably been told the AI race is a contest between two countries and their chatbots. The map says something stranger. The fight runs through a Dutch machine, a Taiwanese factory, and a threshold number written into an American rulebook. And I'm holding one number back. 2 years after the chips were restricted, a lab inside the restricted country published the exact bill for training a frontier-class model on the cut-down hardware it was legally allowed to buy. I'm not saying the figure yet. It's the single best evidence anybody has about whether these rules worked. And we'll put it on screen, itemized, later in this video. Carry that number with you.
River here. The race is a chip race. Said once, so we can stop pretending it's about which assistant sounds friendlier.
Last time we took apart DeepSeek and how one release moved markets in a weekend. Today we go under it, to the hardware and the rules that made that release surprising in the first place. Same discipline as always. Every number gets a source and a date, and where the evidence is genuinely mixed, we will say the evidence is genuinely mixed rather than pick a team.
I'm Erica, and I want to fix the frame before we go one step further. There's no single race. There are 4 separate lanes, and they have different leaders. Compute, which is chips and data centers. Talent, which is the people. Energy, which is the electricity to run any of it. And deployment, which is how much of it actually reaches ordinary users. Treat those as one scoreboard, and you will get every conclusion wrong.
Hey, this is Liam, and my read is that most people, me included, have been quietly scoring only one of those lanes. So can I ask the obvious question? If one country leads compute, and the other leads electricity, who is actually ahead?
Nobody. Both things are true, and that's not a dodge, it's the finding. Whoever tells you one nation is simply winning is selling you a story with the dates filed off.
Take the rules themselves. October 2022, the first broad controls land. October 2023, the workarounds get closed. December 2024, memory chips and tools get added. 2025, a whole framework called the diffusion rule is issued and then pulled before it ever bites. January this year, the door opens a crack, and in June, it closes on a loophole. So if you learned this subject 2 years ago, you're working from a map that no longer matches the ground.
So we date every claim. That's the whole answer to the noise.
Liam, ask the one you've been chewing on since the last episode. It's the question this whole video owes people.
Fine, but I'm slightly embarrassed by it because I think half the internet is quietly confused about the same thing. If the chips were banned, how did China build a top model anyway?
That question has an answer, and the receipts say it cost somebody $5.5 million to demonstrate. So here's where we're going: 3 choke points, 1 line written in a rulebook, and the receipt that settles the argument. Coming up next, the 3 doors every advanced chip on Earth has to walk through, and only one of them is American.
Nobody fights over a chip. They fight over 3 places a chip has to pass through, and every one of them is a door somebody else owns.
That's the right frame, and it's where this episode sits on the stack we keep coming back to. This whole episode lives on layer 8 of the AI stack, the race itself, the part where labs, nations, and open weights collide. The hardware layer underneath it we covered in the chips episode, so I'm not going to reteach how a graphics processor multiplies numbers. I want the geography instead.
Then start with the door the United States owns, which is design. The leading accelerators are designed by American firms, and the software used to design almost any advanced chip anywhere comes from a very small number of American vendors. That's a real choke point, and it's the reason a rule written in Washington can reach a factory in another hemisphere.
Can we just look at one? Because I've never actually seen the thing we're all arguing about.
Look at the die itself. This is the silicon out of a graphics processor photographed under an infrared macro. The company logo is printed right there, big as a billboard, an American company, and directly underneath it, in the same etched lettering, are the words Taiwan. Designed in one country, printed in another. That single square of silicon is the entire argument in one photograph.
Okay, but what's actually in there? Because I picture a tiny city and I'm fairly sure that's not right. Am I close?
Closer than you think. Watch this. That's a real microchip under an electron microscope, and the layers you're looking at are the wiring, stacked floor on floor on floor. The scale bar in the corner says 6 microns, which is about 1/10 the width of a human hair. Every road in that city has to be printed, in the right place, a few dozen atoms wide.
And you can't print roads that small with an ordinary machine. The way we get that resolution is called extreme ultraviolet lithography. And here's the fact that turns a manufacturing detail into geopolitics. Exactly one company on Earth builds those machines, not one country. One company in a town in the Netherlands called Veldhoven, population under 50,000.
Think of it like a lock with one key cutter left alive. Everything else is downstream of that.
The lock analogy breaks in one place, and it matters. A key cutter can be replaced in a year, and this machine took decades of physics that nobody has repeated. That's the honest reason Allied cooperation matters more than any single American rule. The tools are Dutch and Japanese as much as they're American. Washington can restrict a lot on its own. It can't restrict that machine on its own.
Which brings us to the third door, and this is the one that surprises people. The machine gets built in the Netherlands. It gets shipped to Taiwan. Those white freight containers with the maker's name on the side are the actual systems, photographed on a road in Tainan last year, on their way into a fab.
Here's what that photograph means in money. The company those containers are driving toward took 72% of global foundry revenue in the first quarter of this year, on nearly $36 billion. That's not a national champion. That's a load-bearing wall for the entire industry, and it stands about 100 miles off the coast of the country the rules are aimed at.
Let me try the math out loud because I want to feel the number. 72 of every $100. So if you had $10 of leading-edge chips on your desk, 7 of them and change came out of one company's fabs. 7 out of 10. Vishu av no that market. That's a bottleneck with a logo.
So the way the pipeline actually runs end-to-end is this. Design it with American tools. Print it with the one Dutch machine. Fabricate it in Taiwan. Stack the memory on it, which mostly comes from Korea and the United States. Then bolt the finished thing into a server.
And notice what the restricted country is missing at each door. Not one extreme ultraviolet machine has ever been sold into China. Domestic engineers have built a working prototype using a different physics approach, and that's a genuine achievement that gets sneered at far too easily. It's also, as of this July, still a prototype. The reported source power and throughput are far below what a factory needs to make money on a wafer. So the honest state of it is this. The gap at that door is real, and it's measured in years, not months. That's the safest thing I can say. I mean, safest if the reporting holds, and nobody has a surprise in a lab we can't see. Load-bearing claims get load-bearing evidence, which is why I'd rather quote the document than the headline, every time.
And there's a fourth door nobody names: memory. The stacked high-bandwidth memory that feeds the chip is under its own control since December 2024. And the reporting says memory, not logic, is the thing actually capping domestic accelerator output. The bottleneck moved.
Start with the word River just used, controls. Because everything we've described so far is a machine. What turns a machine into a choke point is a rule. And that rule has a number in it, and almost nobody watching this has ever heard the number said out loud. Let me pause for just a second, because this genuinely helps. If you are getting value here, hit that like button, then subscribe and ring the bell. It costs you nothing, and it is the single biggest thing that keeps these videos coming. 21,000, that's the number, and until this year, almost nobody outside a compliance office had ever said it on camera. It's a performance score, and it's the line that decides which chips may be sold into China and which may not. So let me put the two of you on the record, because a question we keep getting splits this room right down the middle. Did the export controls actually work? River thinks the rules did the only job a rule can do. Liam thinks the scoreboard says otherwise.
Before I argue anything, I want the rule itself in plain words because I've read 4 summaries and they contradict each other. What does the current rule actually forbid?
Which rule, though? The one that has been in force since 2022, or the one that changed in January? 2 different answers, and people mix them constantly.
The one in force today, July 2026.
Then here it is. Since October 2022, selling the top-end accelerators into China needs a license, and that license used to start from a presumption of denial. Call it the no unless rule, because that's what it is in a warehouse. No unless you convince us. As of January 15th this year, chips below a line, a total processing performance under 21,000 and memory bandwidth under 6,500 gigabytes a second, which is where a chip like the H200 sits, moved to case-by-case review, meaning maybe if you meet conditions. Above that line, you're still starting from no.
Stop there. Where does that number come from? Not a summary, the rule.
The final rule, in the Federal Register, effective January 15th. The text is public and it's boring and it's the only thing worth trusting.
And the full conditions run to 40-odd paragraphs, so we aren't reading them at you. We will pin the rule text in the description. The one thing to remember is the line, 21,000. Everything else in this fight is people arguing about which side of it a chip lands on.
Liam, take the point River just made and answer it directly. He says a choke point rule can only ever cap hardware. You say the scoreboard disagrees. Make the case.
Then measure the policy against its own promise. The stated goal was to keep advanced AI capability out of reach. And yet a lab inside the restricted country shipped a frontier-class model on chips the rules deliberately allowed and published the receipt. If your fence is meant to stop a thing and the thing appears anyway, the fence didn't do what you said.
Stop right there. That's my lane. You're grading the fence on the wrong exam. A control on machines caps machines. It never claimed to cap arithmetic. And here's the part everyone skips. It worked, and we know it worked, because the bill came due in public. When the rules tightened on one mid-tier chip in April 2025, the company that makes it wrote off $4.5 billion in a single quarter. $4.5 billion in its own annual filing for inventory it could no longer sell. Nobody writes off that much money over a rule that does nothing.
It's a real receipt. I'll grant it. Ever is true, bit somebody. It doesn't prove it bit the thing it was aimed at.
Let me put your 2 numbers next to each other, because that gap is the actual argument. River's number is $4.5 billion of hardware that couldn't move. Liam's number is one frontier model that moved anyway. Both of those are true on the same timeline from primary sources, so the disagreement isn't about facts. It's about which goal you think the policy was ever able to serve.
Correct. But the complication neither of us has touched is that the experiment never held still.
Because the line itself kept moving 4 times in 4 years.
Which is exactly the point I was completing. One at a time is usually my rule, and I just broke it.
One at a time, River first, then Liam, 1 sentence each. Go.
The line moved 4 times in 4 years, so any verdict has an expiry date.
And in January, the door opened a crack in the other direction, which nobody predicted.
Here's the complication I want on the table, and it belongs to neither of you. In January, the review policy softened for chips under the line. In June, Commerce issued guidance affirming that the licensing requirements reach any business headquartered in China, including subsidiaries operating outside it. So in the same 6 months, the rules got looser in one direction and tighter in another. That's not incoherence, necessarily. It's a government trying to sell the safe tier while closing the back door.
Or it's two goals fighting. Both are defensible. Only one can be measured.
So where this room lands is a bounded yes, and I want the boundary stated out loud because the boundary is the whole verdict. Inside the boundary of top-end hardware volume, the controls worked. That's measurable, and there's a $4.5 billion write-off proving it. Outside that boundary, ideas, efficiency, published research, downloadable weights, they didn't work and they were never built to. Anyone who tells you the controls simply succeeded is ignoring the model. Anyone who tells you they simply failed is ignoring the write-off. And we're going to come back with the exact number behind Liam's model claim in a moment, because it's the receipt this entire fight turns on.
Right tool, wrong exam.
Different animal entirely. Forget the arguing. Read the bill.
This is the number I held back at the top. The receipts say it plainly, and they say it itemized, $5.576 million. That's the stated cost of the final training run for DeepSeek version 3 from its own technical report.
Run the rows. What did the bulk of it buy?
Pre-training, 2.664 million GPU hours at $2 an hour, $5.328 million.
Then context extension, 119,000 hours, $238,000.
And post-training, 5,000 hours, $10,000. Add them, 2.788 million GPU hours, $5.576 million.
On what hardware, though? That's the whole ballgame.
H800s, the export-compliant part, built to sit under the American line and sold legally.
So the constraint didn't block the work. It picked the tool,
Which means the run cost, what, 10 million? 20 with the export tax?
it picks the tool, and no, 5.576 million, not 10. The paper says $2 a GPU hour, and the arithmetic is theirs, not ours.
Careful though, that figure isn't the model's total cost, and the paper says so itself in writing.
You said excludes. What exactly does it exclude in one sentence?
Prior research, elation experiments on architectures, algorithms, and data, all the runs that failed on the way.
So it's the cost of the winning lap, not the cost of the season.
Fair point, and it's still the most important number in this fight.
Because it settles what the controls could and couldn't touch. Hardware, yes. Cleverness, no.
Squeeze the supply of shovels. You don't stop the digging. You change how people dig.
So the promise I made you at the top is paid. That's the sourced bill, and it was earned on legal chips. Almost everyone watching should take it at face value, almost. There's one group this number badly misleads, and we owe them a warning.
The people about to conclude that frontier AI is now cheap. Because if you read $5.5 million as the price of a frontier lab, you've just deleted the 2,000 chips it ran on, the failed runs before it, and the salaries of the people who wrote it. The training run was cheap. Getting to the point where a training run is even possible isn't.
Which is a good moment for me to stop being the one explaining. River, I want you to teach this next part to me like I've never seen a scoreboard. Because I keep catching myself scoring this the lazy way.
Then take the 4 lanes and grade them separately. Compute, chip tools, electricity, open weights. Watch what happens. Lane 1, frontier compute. The United States is ahead, and it's ahead because it built the rules that keep it ahead. That's the whole lane. Lane 2, chip tools. Not ahead, locked. There's a difference, and it matters. A lock can be picked, given a decade.
Hold on. Can I stop us and change the question? Because I think we're scoring the wrong thing entirely. We keep asking who has more chips. Shouldn't we ask who can afford to run them?
That's the better question, and it moves us straight into the lane nobody puts on a magazine cover: electricity. Say the numbers and say the year.
2025, China generated about 10,583 terawatt-hours of electricity. The United States generated about 4,520, roughly 2.3 times as much in 1 year from the same dataset, measured the same way. Which means the electricity lane isn't close and the chip rules don't reach it, so the honest read is,
Wait, is that whole grid running AI or an economy?
the honest read is an economy, overwhelmingly. Good catch, and it's the correction this number needs because a raw generation figure flatters whoever quotes it.
This next part is the one people rewind, so take it slow. 2.3 times the electricity did mean 2.3 times the AI, right?
Right, and I want that said carefully. Most of that power is running an industrial economy, not a data center. But a data center's constraint isn't chips alone. It's chips, plus the substation, plus the transformer, plus the years of permitting. That's the lane where one side is genuinely building faster, and it's the lane the chip fight doesn't touch.
About 42% of that generation is low carbon, though America's share is about 43%. So this lane is about volume, not cleanliness.
It is, and here's the number that lane actually turns on: 2.3 times the generation, and about 42% of it clean. Whatever you think of the chip rules, they don't build a single power line.
And lane 4, deployment, is where I've the least confidence, and I'd rather say that than bluff. Both countries are shipping AI into ordinary products at speed. The measurements aren't comparable, the definitions aren't shared, and anyone quoting you a clean deployment ranking is quoting a marketing deck.
So the 4 lanes have 4 different answers, and only one of them is even about chips.
4 lanes, 4 verdicts. That's the whole answer.
Which is why the phrase "who is winning" is the tell. It's not a question. It's a sales pitch, and it works because it saves you the effort of grading 4 things.
Different lanes, different verdicts.
Right race, wrong scoreboard.
There's one thing in this whole story that no rule in any country has been able to touch, and we've been circling it for 20 minutes.
A chip clears customs. A file doesn't.
Okay, I'm leaning in for this one because I want to make sure I have it right. When a lab publishes open weights, the model file itself is out. Anyone downloads it. It runs on their own machine, offline, forever. Am I close?
You're close enough that the rest is detail, and this is the part I want to walk end to end because it's where the whole chip war gets strange. Everything we've described until now is a physical supply chain. A machine leaves Veldhoven. It arrives in Tainan. A wafer gets printed, a die gets cut, a package gets stacked with memory, a server gets bolted together, and every single one of those steps happens somewhere a customs officer can stand. That's what makes a choke point possible in the first place. But the thing everybody actually wants at the end of that chain isn't the metal. It's a file of numbers. And once a lab decides to publish that file, the entire apparatus of ports, licenses, thresholds, and entity lists is standing guard over a door the value already walked out of.
And that's the 21,000 lines blind spot. It's written in gigabytes per second. It has nothing to say about a download.
Which is exactly why I want someone who knows these rules cold, rather than 4 people reasoning from a summary. We asked Petra Havel to join us. Petra knows the advanced chip export rules and how they keep moving, so I want to hand her the question we can't settle ourselves.
People say export controls like export controls are one thing. They aren't. A control on a machine stops an object at a border. A control on information tries to stop a copy, and those are different physics with different success rates. The first has a track record, the second historically doesn't.
So could a rule just ban publishing the weights? Say that number again for me. How much of the fight does that even reach?
It reaches what isn't yet published, nothing that's already out. And I'd be careful about anyone's confident claim on that file, including mine. I can tell you the pattern. With these rules, controlling an object works about as well as the enforcement behind it, and controlling a copy almost never has.
Read me the actual line then. If a chip like the H200 is now case by case, what's the condition people keep missing?
The volume cap. Aggregate shipments to China and Macau no more than 50% of what was shipped to customers for end use in the United States. That's in Supplement 2 to Part 748, I believe. Check the number, not the principle. The principle isn't in doubt. The American market gets the majority by rule.
So the rule sells the chip and caps the share. That's a trade policy wearing a security policy's coat, and reasonable people can defend it either way.
Or it's both at once, which is usually what these are. And that's the note I'd leave you on, so thank you for having me. Read the rule, not the summary of the rule. Everything else is somebody's opinion about a document they didn't open.
I want to bring in something I saw, with a grain of salt, because it was one comment thread and I can't verify the person. A developer claimed he had a Chinese open-weight model running on a machine in his basement with the network cable pulled out, and that no rule on earth could reach it. It's a one guy's story, and I'm not vouching for his basement.
But the rule part of it, does that hold?
Fair point, and the rule part still checks out. The weights for that model family are published for public download under an open license, so once the file is on your disk...
Hold on. A license isn't an export rule. Two different documents.
So once the file is on your disk, running it isn't an export at all, which means neither document reaches you. That's the mechanism. No border stands between you and a copy you already have. His basement I can't confirm. The rule I can.
Withdrawn. Cleanly. And to borrow River's phrase, the no unless rule only ever governed crates. A wall works on objects. It has never worked on copies, and the honest answer is that it was never designed to.
Which is why I keep the coffee ritual. 1 cup, done right, no shortcuts. And I'd say the same thing about a definition. Define winning before you claim it, or you're just pouring hot water on beans.
Fair, so define it. What would winning even look like?
Name the lane, then name the year. Winning frontier compute in 2026 is a claim you can check. Winning the AI race isn't a claim at all. And that settles it for me. Any headline that won't name its lane isn't reporting a race, it's picking a side and hoping you don't notice.
So the one idea to carry out of here is this. The chip war is a fight over doors, and the thing everyone wants stopped learned to travel as a download. That's the line, the lanes, and the file that walks through walls. So the chip war is a fence around a warehouse, in a world where the valuable thing has learned to email itself.
Right fence. Wrong warehouse.
And what you walk out with tonight is a habit, not a headline. The next time somebody tells you who is winning the AI race, you ask them 2 questions. Which lane and what year is your source? Do that once this week and you'll catch a bad claim in the wild, and that's a skill you keep long after these particular rules expire.
The thing I can't stop thinking about is what happens to all of this if the machines stop being the bottleneck. Which, funnily enough, is exactly where the next episode goes, the model wars, and what actually separates the big 3 assistants.
If this reframed the race for you, hit like and subscribe, because this series is building one layer at a time, and this was layer 8 of the stack. And here's the one only you can answer. If open weights cross every border, what does winning this race even mean? Take it to the comments, because we genuinely don't have a settled answer to that one. Thank you for spending your time with us, and go check a date on something today. This is Jasmine signing off.
This is Professor Erica. Thanks for watching and signing off.